We are a community.
We're live. So, hi everybody. Welcome to Sokokoji Buddhist Community in Traverse City. As you know, the Temple Monastery is down in Battle Creek, and that's usually where Sokuzan does his Dharma talks from. But once a month, they come up here to visit Traverse City, where we have extended Sangha, and this is just some of the people up here. November is our friendship.
Sokokoji Awareness and Friendship Month. Hi.
There's, so we're raising money to support the whole community, and specifically in November to help support the Temple Monastery down in Battle Creek, because that's the hub of all of our activity, and it supports all the programming and support that we do everywhere. So if you're able to help us out, there's a donate button right on here, and yeah, you can do that. You can get, I think they have mugs that you've seen down there and a meditation primer. This will help you get started in your practice. So
visit our website, and you can see some extended details about our Awareness Month. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, we have continued information that's going out this month. So maybe you can give your email address. We're having some difficulty with our website email. So Kozan, you want to give?
Yeah, this is Sokokoji TC at gmail.com. And that will get you to Traverse City, where you can hook up to the main website. So, okay.
Sokuzan will be here momentarily.
So we're still live, you guys. It's kind of terrible.
I'm Sokuzan.
Kozan.
Joy.
Unyo.
Yes, we. Raquel. Lisa. Jennifer. Wendy. Alex.
Okay. Now let's get this out of the way first. This morning's Dharma talk is titled Relationships 101. How's that sound? I think I gave a couple of relationship talks in the past, but well, maybe I'll differentiate that from the other ones. Though I wouldn't have to, because I never say the same thing twice, unless I do. That's the exception. So relationships, we all talk about that. It's common got to work on our relationship, or we got to, my relationships are going haywire either at work or coworkers or at boss or whatever, mom and dad, brothers, siblings. There's all kinds of, sometimes we have trouble with our dog. The dog doesn't agree with us about something, like what it wants to eat. Like it wants to eat chickens. Your dog can't eat chicken. So my first teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Tibetan Lama that passed away in 1987. One of the things he said that stuck with me a long time, I've contemplated that over a long period of time. I'm very much a relationship person, so to speak. I've had lots and lots of relationships. This is a relationship. And you can't seem to do anything but have relationships. But something he said, and I don't remember the context of the teaching, you probably could find it somewhere in the hundreds and thousands of words that he said. But he said the best relationship is no relationship. And I think at the time I thought, that doesn't make any sense. What does he mean? How is he trying to help us work with our minds in such a way that we can understand maybe more deeply what is a relationship? All kinds of relationships that have certain kinds of qualities or standards to them that we subscribe to or obey, or form. Our culture is just full of that tell you exactly how a marriage should work, although there's maybe 1,520 different opinions on how that should work. But it's about the relationship. The fundamental nature of relationship is what he was addressing. And this is not something you can arrive at that understanding through thought patterns. It is not a conclusion. And took me a few decades and several thousand relationships to be able to get some kind of understanding of what that is. And it is not, it's not something you conclude. It's not something you believe about relationships necessarily. It's that kind of a teaching is to help you to do what? Well, just what it did for me. I immediately started to look, what does he mean by that? So what happened with me is I began to look at the nature of the relationship I was in. And then I would say, how does that fit? The best relationship would be no relationship. And, the conclusion, or the kind of the spontaneous conclusion was that would be, does he mean avoiding people, not seeing anybody, not talking to anybody? What is that? So it has a profound and deep meaning. It's a direct pointing at the nature of reality. And what is that? I can say it in a couple of words that you can contemplate for a while. Not separate. You can only have a relationship with somebody that you're separate from. Then it's a relationship. But the best relationship is not separate. And how would you understand that? The mind cannot reach there. The mind can go up the steps, but when it gets to the top step, it looks down and sees empty space. It sees the top of the mountain, or it maybe sees the edge of a cliff. Everyone would see it a little bit differently. Some people would just look at the stairs and say, not for me. I'm going to go have some ice cream. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to find a path that does to bendable stairs. Pardon me, or maybe no path. Maybe your path in life is to not. Maybe this isn't your lifetime to walk a spiritual path, to travel. Excuse me. The path with no goal. Most people want a path that has an ending or goal or accomplishment. This is called spiritual materialism, looking for something else, something better, something higher, something to accomplish, to get some kind of a credential. At least I've worked hard and now I have my result. This works fine if you're going to a university, wanted to get a degree. Works fine if you're going to build a business. It works fine. All of the mundane things, which we're not trying to get rid of those. Please don't. You don't have to go the other way and go to the top of the mountain and take a bed sheet with you and a bowl of rice. You could actually live in this world. This is the times of like it was for ancient monasteries where they had to run off and, pardon me again. Those days are gone. That time was the perfect way to practice, to take, for the Buddha 2,500 years ago, to receive dozens and dozens, hundreds, thousands of 14, 15, 16-year-old men, some women, but mainly men, young boys out of their family to train them. Different situation then. Now we have a combination of all of the things in our society, with the quality of intelligence, understanding, perception, and so on, with the incredible new technologies of communication we have, where you can, as Marshall McLuhan said back in the 1950s, a global village. It's suddenly you're talking to somebody in Europe, in real time, you're talking to them. Astonishing. Everything travels. Of course, as we all know, there's the upside to that. You get to talk to anybody you want, and there's the downside. You get to talk to anybody you want. So confusing, to say the least. We're more isolated in some ways and less in others. It's just an astonishing thing to look at. And people are writing books about that all the time. You don't need to read a book. You don't need to write a book. You've got enough of a book. If you just look at this wall, just gaze at the wall. All you're really doing, it's not about the wall. It's about having the eye consciousness open, the eye object, the wall, nothing much happening there, so that you can just see what continues to show up as something, thoughts, ideas, emotions, memories. Just observe. Most human beings are trying, as soon as something shows up, they want to do something else with it. The second noble truth of the Buddha, maybe I should start with the first. The first noble truth of the Buddha, put in modern language, is life sucks. Life is suffering. This is difficult. And if you think that it's suffering is part-time, you misunderstand, because it's continuous. And it is difficult to work with. It's not nihilism, it's just the truth. So what do? We sit down, hold still as a training, and start out with the primary misunderstanding, is that there's someone solid being here who needs to be fixed, who shouldn't be this way, who got a raw deal. And I could go on, but you get the point. Sit down and make friends with that person. Sit down, hold still, watch what moves, watch the mind grasp at this passion, watch the mind reject that aggression, and watch the mind shut down on anything it doesn't want, doesn't understand, is bored with, and so on. Ignorance, passion, aggression, and ignorance. Those are the three ways, according to the Buddhist teaching, going back 2,500 years, that we avoid reality, that we avoid what is fundamentally true. Find out what that is. Buddhism is not a belief system, although sometimes it's promoted that way by different schools and lineages, and mixed with their various cultures. Japanese culture was a pretty macho culture, so Buddhism shows up there as a macho. Not wrong, just another way of doing it. As in ancient China, it was different there, mixed with Taoism. Ancient India. I mean, when the Buddha passed, and I think it was deliberate on his part, although we didn't check in with him, but it was deliberate to not give too much information. He made it so vague that within 100 years, there was, I think, 18 different schools that sprung up, all had a different idea of what he was talking about. And that was not confusing. That's the way he held it together. That's why you're hearing the words of the Buddha, as so far as I can even do that. You're hearing that same teaching right here. It's just warm hand to warm hand. You can't read this out. You can read it out of a book and get interested. You might get started, but you really need to meet someone who understands this. I make no claims. I don't have any propaganda. If this sounds like propaganda, leave. Go ahead. And on the other hand, go in the other direction. Don't believe a word I say. And don't disbelieve it. If you come in here, as I say so many times, you give me permission to talk for another, 45 minutes or so on. You could listen to it, and then it's up to you. If it resonates, makes some sense, similar frequency there, then you probably won't be able to go somewhere else. In the sense of you still be thinking about that. I might not be your teacher, but something about the way this is presented might resonate with you or not. I don't mind. You could put soup in this. So the relationship dynamic, the way I would recommend is just whatever relationship, whether you're significant other or your job or something, any kind of relationship situation. If you're a student of mine, then then that would be a valuable relationship for you to really look and see what that is. See if there is someone else. See if there is another person. I'm not saying there's another body. There's lots of bodies, but that proves nothing. What appears is going down. All compounded things. I didn't make this up. This is what the Buddha said. All compounded things will vanish, will go away. Everything that comes up is going down. Everything is born will die. What doesn't die? That which is not born. And that which is not born is, what is it? 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 Carpeting? Carpeting's going down. Wisdom. What is wisdom? Find out. I can't, if it's assuming I even knew anything about it, I can't just say, here's your morning dosage of wisdom. It is not conventional knowledge. It is transcendent knowledge. It's the way, relative ways of talking about it. Anytime you conclude anything, you think you know something, you ignore everything else. So all knowledge is in its own way is ignorance. But wisdom doesn't know something else. Wisdom only sees wisdom. It may show up in forms but those forms are not seductive, nor are they repulsive, nor do they need any kind of validation, or they don't need anything. But if you see clearly what this says, you don't see anything else but wisdom. You see human beings, and if the human beings are suffering in this path, the Mahayana path, which means to receive a vow to be with all things, relationship. So you don't ignore the relationship. You just notice that the way in which the relationship works is ultimately nothing is separate. That wisdom only sees wisdom, doesn't see someone else. This is another way of talking about emptiness. Main teaching of Buddhism is saying that things both. This is the hard part. Things both exist and non-exist at the same time. It's called in the Hindu tradition. It's called Advaita, non-duality, not two different things, and also they aren't the same either. So it's perplexing to the ego mind, which is quite materialistic, and is reinforced by all the things we run into in the world, like trying to make a living, trying to have a good relationship, trying to figure out a way to protect our children or our job or our country or our society or whatever. So it's just again, it's not wrong. It's just insofar as you can, if you wish to walk a spiritual path, then take as big a picture as you can. How do you do that? By taking as small a picture as you can. That's what the wall is for. That's what, or if you don't want to face the wall, if you're claustrophobic, then face a computer, but turn it off. Sit down, hold still, watch what doesn't move, the wall. And after a while, you'll notice that what continues to move are aspects of consciousness, memories, ideas. If you sit there long enough, eventually the thing kind of wears out. There isn't much going on. It's sometimes called boredom. Boredom is the downside of it is boring, but the upside of boredom is that it is a sign that you are weaning yourself away from the need for constant entertainment. That's how it feels. And my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, broke that up into two kinds of boredom. There's the hot boredom you might experience where you're just antsy and just don't want to be here anymore. In ancient times, or which means 20 years ago, they might have said, "Well, stay there anyway." I don't say that. Want to get up and go do something else. It's just a misunderstanding. And then, of course, come back and sit again. But don't necessarily force anything. You might have a form that says, like we do at the monastery, the form is you sit 6.5 hours a day. But if you don't want to do that, then just tell me you don't want to do that. And I'll say, well, don't live at the monastery then. I don't say do that. I say, that's what we do at the monastery. Go live. You could actually live next door and just come over once a month. It'd be much easier. So forms are meant to be observed, not obeyed. This is a misunderstanding, and as far as I'm concerned, a different cultural context in Tibet, in Japan, and China. We just don't need to do that. We don't need that kind of controlling. We can treat each other as adults, as a mutual thing, rather than the teacher has to treat people like children who need to be threatened or something. So it's about looking at the relationship and not concluding. Those of you who have heard me talk much say I say don't conclude. That doesn't mean you can stop concluding. But if I say that, then you may look at the way your conclusion, your ego grasping, concluding, wants to conclude, doesn't like not knowing anything for any length of time. So we want to, it's like I need to make up my mind by next Thursday where I'm going on vacation. Might be a good idea just to not to think anything up. And you might say, I might say, anybody might say, well, might not have any plane tickets. I said, well, just go to Grand Rapids in your car. I mean, you could actually live in the reality that you're here instead of protecting yourself by using all those various extensions or relationship dynamics that are kind of a knee-jerk kind of thing that we do rather than just look at the very simple situation that we're in. So I would also like to say that questions are always appropriate. I can continue to talk without questions, but it helps make it a little bit more interactive. Karen?
Regarding elective relationships, personal relationships,
Yes.
Sometimes it feels like how to be in them. If we are in relationship with everything anyway, and there's no separation, why pick and choose this one to have a relationship with, or that one to go deeper? And what does deeper mean?
Give me one question. That's too complicated. Just give me a question. I heard what you said.
In personal relationships that we choose to be in,
Yes.
what does it mean to go deeper and share in a deeper?
One question. No, it's to get too complicated. I'm pretty simple. One question, straight arrow. You know what I'm saying. Just you can cast the other one next, but you can ask 5 questions, but one at a time.
In our personal relationships,
Yes.
How do we go deeper?
Yes.
Without bringing our ego into it?
Don't worry about your ego. Ego's not real. If you think it's real, then you're concerned about being egotistical, or you're getting credit for being less egotistical than you were yesterday. That's just spinning. Ego's not real. The most important thing for you to see, for anybody to see, is the primary misunderstanding, which is that there's a solid being that likes this, doesn't like that, succeeds at this, success, failure, so just start out with that. Start at the beginning. Start at square one, so to speak. Sit down, hold still, and watch the believer person expand on the whole idea of relationships outside of the actual relationship that you're having with that other person. Have ideas about it, all kinds of collections, just like barnacles on a ship. You know, it's not the ship, but it goes everywhere the ship goes. So you have to deal with it. So you have to deal with that, and instead of you're dealing with all of your additions to it, your ideas, you can't actually see the surface of the boat. The metaphor only goes so far, but it's some kind of thing that's unnecessary. Just keep it very simple. Sit down and look at the identity here. Look at the me feeling that is here, because that is what you're taking into the relationship dynamic that clouds makes it feel unclear, and like the issues you have maybe with your the relationship dynamic, your partner, your mate, your students, in your case, patients or whatever. Pardon me. So keep it simple to start with. And so if you try to go beyond that, just go into working with the relationship itself, then we get caught in that circularity of success and failure. My relationship's really starting to work now. Well, that's not going to last. Anything that shows up is going away. Success is going away. Failure is going away. the cycle that is there might be, 28 years or 28 days, cycle of the moon, could be anything, but everything is cyclic. If it shows up, it's part of a cycle. That's why the best relationship is no relationship. That cannot be explained. I think probably Rinpoche would have explained it, but he thought, I don't know what the hell he thought. But the way I understand it, after looking at it for several decades, is just use the idea of relationship as part of the issue. You should just look at what's in front of you and see that you're not separate from it. It's called insight. It's called wisdom. And the amazing thing, if that shows up for you, for any of you, you will also see that you're separate at the same. You're actually fundamentally separated as a body, but you also realize you're not. Even though there's a human form, you're not a human. I mean, you're in human form, temporary. Who you are is beyond all of that. Nor are you an alien, nor are you a pigeon or a duck. But you could be. And I'm not threatening you with anything. I'm just saying anything's possible. Anything's possible. Except that one thing you're thinking about, how is it going to happen? So do you follow me a little bit? Say, look at the relationship, the person who's creating those artificial, when I say artificial, because they're invented. See if there is a relationship. See what it is. It will show up for anyone here who's in any kind of relationship, agreeable situation. It's wonderful and supportive, as I'm in with my lovely wife here. How's it going for you?
Great. Today is great.
Today's great, yeah. Life does suck. Don't you forget it. So, I mean, everything is always tumbling around and going this way, going that way. And the ego mind, the self-centered mind, which we don't need to get rid of, but that shows up to complement the unreality of the primary situation, or not primary, but the secondary or tertiary situation that's all around us, other people, other things, events, world politics and everything. Find out who this is. Train your mind. I say this over and over. I must say it over. I really need to say this. What do I mean by train your mind? Sit down, hold still, find out who you are. Don't settle for half measures. Look at the half measures, but don't settle. Remember, it's a half measure. There's more. There's something else. What is it? Find out. I couldn't, if this wasn't full of soup and I got it full of wisdom and try to pour it all over you, even though anointing sometimes works. Might work better, just hit you with a stick. That's what they did in ancient times, but I don't think that's a good idea. But I wouldn't get too close. Since we're into questions, yes, Chogyam.
You just said half measures. What is a half measure?
This is a half measure. Getting ready to strike the bell and you come down and you stop. Very simple. And if you keep going, and then this is a half measure, and this is a half measure, this is a half measure. So what I'm saying is, if anything that starts and finishes, there's always a space in between the beginning of the journey and the end of the journey. And a lot of times that whole area in there gets kind of blanked out because we're so concentrated on where we're going, we miss where we've just been, or we miss what we're going through. So it's about bringing awareness into as much space. It looks like space. Well, I'm going to strike the bell. And so we pick it up, and the intention is to do that. So we just go ahead and do it. We totally miss that there's a whole area where the mind just shuts down. Called a gap. There are gaps everywhere. One of the most, talking about relationships, 101, important gap is the gap in any relationship dynamic you're in. There are gaps there that there's no thinking going on, no processing, no conclusions, no exclusions, not much of anything. It's called relative emptiness. Certainly.
You said don't settle for half measures. What do you mean by that?
I meant today just to say, just don't settle. Could be, don't settle for anything. It's like, the other way of saying it, don't conclude. At the same time, I know I can't help but conclude. But if I say don't conclude, then you might look more closely. Like if Trungpa Rinpoche says the best relationship is no relationship, you know, what happened with me is I just thought about that for years, having lots of difficulty with relationships. So how could there be no relationship here? It's like it's extremely powerful, confusing relationship. But it caused me to look at it over and over and over. And I'll always remember what he said, and fundamentally helped me to see more deeply. I can't go into that understanding and bring it out in words other than what I'm doing here. I'm endeavoring to do that. I'm endeavoring to talk about this in such a way that it'll help everyone look more closely at things they just, anytime you conclude everything, you stop investigating. Anytime you have thoughts in response to something, you can see that sometimes those thoughts are kind of lined up with what's happening, but other times they're actually covering up what's happening because we're so interested in knowing what's true and what's not true. And this has to do with our self-centeredness. We don't want to be confused. We don't want to not know. We want to know. So sometimes we'll settle for something, sometimes called an opinion. Opinions are worthless from the point of view of the spiritual path. If it's a mundane path, then it kind of depends on, you know, phase of the moon. You know, if moon's in Aquarius, then you're probably all right. Just don't misunderstand. I'm not saying we should throw thinking out or analysis. No, but it needs to have a priority. What should lead your life? I use this constantly because I think it's not smart enough to come up with something else, I guess. But here's awareness back here, and thinking process out of fear, out of hope, out of wanting to be in control. We try to lead with our thinking process so we don't get in hot water, so we don't get too vulnerable. We protect ourselves. Sometimes called an introvert. Just joking. And if you strengthen the awareness eventually, without even doing anything, the awareness will start to leak out in front of the thought process. And it's like a breath of fresh air. You actually are living your life out of your awareness rather than out of some kind of parabola that has all kinds of aspects to it that are preventing you from actually relaxing in the space that you're in, on your own feet, in your body, in your mind, living as a human being, which you are not exactly a living being, as I said.
When you're investigating, it makes me think intellectual.
When you hear what now?
Investigating.
Yeah.
It makes me think.
Yes.
Thinking process. It's like you're searching for a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But do you mean investigating as in awareness?
Yes. Yes, because if you say, just use a real mundane example. Somebody broke into your house and robbed you, and you could see that things were tipped over and everything. You wouldn't immediately do much of anything and just look at it. And especially if you were an actual investigator, they wouldn't even let you go in there, and they would put on gloves and they would try to not contaminate the evidence. Or, excuse me, a very mundane example, but the intellectual thing might happen later, but the first it has to be just bear attention on everything. Because if you just go in intellectually, then you're going to come to conclusions about things that are not fundamentally true. You're taking things for granted because you're, who knows what the because is about. But so in the same thing, we're not getting rid of thought process. In our school here, in our studies, we study the concepts that go back thousands of years over and over and over again, like the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, Lankavatara Sutra, Samdhinirmacchana Sutra, all kinds of sutras that I can't even pronounce. But we go into those and look at what did someone think in the 3rd century who was a monk or a scholar or someone who's totally dedicated to this, who seemed to have an understanding about the Buddha's teaching that was not away from it, but a more profound elaboration, like the 1st century scholar, monk, Nagarjuna, who came up with the Tetralemma, not this, not that, not both, not neither. Very simple statement that totally destroys philosophy. You can't conclude things. You can make some conclusions, but you can't go too far with it. More, Wendy?
And investigating the same thing as searching, as if you were searching for something and that something just never shows
A
up.
little bit. So the searching is good, but having an idea of what you're searching for, you could minimize that. You know, you could be, you're looking, you're watching what moves. So my way of saying it, and this is not something I invented particularly, sit down, hold still, watch what moves, because you're basically what's going to show up in different people's minds. You know, your issue with things, or your issue, or my issue, or anyone's issue is going to show up with a different kind of quality. Your own karma, which means action, your own causes and conditions, which means this lifetime for you. And this isn't the first one. Don't believe anything I say. You don't have to believe a damn thing. But since you're here, listen, consider it, see if it floats. If it floats, it's probably a duck. Oh, I think quacking is the key thing. Could be just a piece of wood shaped like a duck. Is that still a duck? Better duck. So investigating by sitting down and using the six sense fields, including the mind, to just receive. If you're producing with of all the six sense fields, the six thinking process, the only one that can really produce. The ears don't produce sounds. The eyes don't produce sights, but the mind receives thoughts and produces thoughts. That's where it's tied into karma, cause and effect. So whatever's coming towards the mind, the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the body, whatever, just receive. As I've said dozens of times, the most subtle and profound form of generosity is to give everything your attention all the time, always be on receive. Production, if it needs to show up, it'll let you know. You could say something or respond to something or conclude something, but not much. Mostly beyond receive. And when you're really on receive, you won't do much math. Interestingly enough, along the lines of what you were asking about analysis, if the awareness is really powerful, when it is time to analyze, you're totally ready to do that, and it's choiceless. You just start analyzing the situation because it's time for that. But if you do it prematurely, then it's based on what? Fear. What if I don't get? What if I don't? What if I miss it? I better start writing it down right now. It has a fear base, and as soon as fear shows up, everything starts becoming opaque from the point of view of the fundamental nature of what's been happening. Or does that make some sense? Thank you. Yes, Yasmin.
It seems to me from what you've said, Guruji, that awareness is just that first moment, and after that comes the thought process. Am I right? Is awareness not something that is there throughout your thinking? Is that right?
Awareness is the training aspect of wisdom. So there has to be some kind of awareness quality happening where you're endeavoring to see what is there rather than see what you think is there. A good example of that is if somebody comes walking in the room you've never met before, you'll notice because you don't know is the tendency to project onto them what they're wearing, what they look like, how tall they are, how old they are. It just happens in microseconds. If they're quite a bit different than you, then you may, if your awareness is really clear, notice the automatic cultural prejudice that happens. And if at any time, especially white people, talk to some white person that says they're not prejudiced, they're full of it. They're prejudiced. You can't help but be. I can't help but be this person and not be. I'm an old white man. Of course I'm prejudiced. But being aware of the prejudice is what's important, not getting rid of prejudice. You cannot get rid of something that is part of the whole dynamic. You can't get rid of it, but you can at least be aware that you've been conditioned in a certain way so that you don't function out of that kind of stupidity. More about that, Yasmin?
Not here. Thank you.
How is awareness a training practice for wisdom?
So the recommendation is you sit down and you, whatever's in front of you, the wall, you're just aware of the wall. And then these other 5 sense fields are operating with their objects, sounds, smells, taste, touch, all that. Taste of your own saliva. It's an object in that particular consciousness that is showing up there. Because it's so primary, because it's so simple, and we are organisms, we are human beings, because it's such a primary area that by going to that, eventually there's the possibility of the wisdom mind, which has been here, which is not a thing, has no, as I said traditionally, no ontological status. It has no thingness to it. It's not something. If it's something, it's going away. Wisdom can't go away because it hasn't appeared. So the closest thing to that is the openness, is talked about through the word awareness, which is you're receiving whatever's showing up. And so this is the path to, as far as the Buddha's teaching is going, to seeing the fundamental truth, or wisdom, or ultimate truth, absolute truth. You are not separate from that. Never have been, never will be. And but it's not something you believe in. You don't disbelieve it and suddenly believe it. If you realize this, if you awaken to this, you will realize it's just something you've been covering up since you were born, and now you're no longer covered up. So this is why it's called liberation. You're not free from something. You're not free to do something. You just no longer have any questions about anything. And why? You see what it is. What is it? Not separate. What's the fancy word for it? Jnana, wisdom, prajna, or just stuff. Is that funny? Kind of funny. Questions are good if you have them. I can also continue to chatter. Go ahead.
You used the analogy with your hand, and one in front of your face and one further out. And you said we're leading with our thinking process, not the awareness. Mm-hmm. But then you said that you're free to analyze. So how can awareness be ahead of analysis?
It's just a way it's a path. If you want to tell somebody how to go through the Vasa Trail, you'd have to get a map and say you turn here and you cross, and don't watch out for there's a bear behind this bush. You tell people about it. But then when you go into the situation, you'd say, where's the bears? And the bear's behind you. So you didn't tell them about that. So it's just a construct. It's just it's not like that at all. Wisdom is always present. There's anything but wisdom. And the other stuff that shows up is just impermanence. It's just the phenomena that comes and goes, and various qualities of this as a physical organism. We have the sense fields. So it's just showing up in different ways. When you realize it, then you don't see anything but wisdom. Every sound is wisdom. Every bird flying by, every thought that arises. This is why I tell people, if you want to save all beings, if you want to be with all things, start out with your own thought process. Sit down, hold still, don't object, don't agree, don't look away. Those are the 3 poisons. Don't agree with it, with thoughts arising, don't object to them, and don't look away. And as I say that, I know you can't help but do that, because I do that. But that gets you to look closely at the actual operation of the thought arising. Do nothing with it. Don't agree, don't disagree, and don't shut down. And that can be very, very painful if this is the first experience you've had of getting a good stiff dose of your own karma. You can avoid karma. You can move to St. Louis. Forget you ever saw me. Change your name. I might track you down. More?
What is wisdom? What is wisdom?
Not separate. There isn't anything but wisdom from the point of view of ultimate truth. Relative truth is there's a table, there's a computer, there are human beings, there's a sky, there's snow, there's the bears. But ultimately, those are not separate. They're seen as separate because we're separated into a body-mind complex as a human being, as a living being. But so are cockroaches. So are bears. And, we're not that dissimilar. There's some similarities, and there's some things that are different. More questions about that are good. Let's go into it. Help me.
So what, wisdom, what is wise?
There isn't anything that's wise. If there's someone who's wise, then it's not exactly wisdom. It's just highfalutin philosophy, psychology. It's somebody who knows more than other people, like Nietzsche, Friedrich Hegel, Kierkegaard. I'm just naming a few Westerners. Usually the Westerners are the ones that are full of themselves. Very intelligent, smarty pants. Yes.
Kozan's question made me think that we're not on the same page in terms of awareness, because for me,
Well, you're in the table of contents, she's in the index.
I don't even know what that is.
But
What's
just say
the
it.
index?
Huh?
What's the index? What's
I was
the
just
index?
being.
Yeah, I know.
I was just.
No.
Go ahead.
Okay, so for Kozan, she said, how can you have awareness behind your thought? For me, it's the awareness is first and the thought comes afterwards.
Okay.
So what are we not quite in sync with? What are we not understanding?
You think there's a relationship?
Huh?
You think there's a relationship?
I think there's a misunderstanding.
I like that. Use that word all the time. Just a misunderstanding. We think there's somebody, and it's not that there isn't somebody. Of course there is, but that somebody is not separate from every other thing. Different. There's all similar people, but everyone's wired differently. Your karma's differently. You're raised differently. You have different health issues, or maybe no health problems at all. So lots of variations. It's in the Buddhism. It's called the 10,000 things that make it confusing and make it look like there's something to do, somewhere to get, somebody to be. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do whatever you want to do, but at some point, one of those relativities that you think are two separate things are going to catch up with you. The one I'm talking about is death. Death comes without warning. It's not nihilism. It's just true. You know anybody that's never died? Is that funny? Huh?
Some of us are still here.
Some of us are still here. Some of us are running out of time. I'm one of them, but you're one of them. It's just relative. But if there's a fear of death, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have some trepidation about it, but then there's something you're misunderstanding, because who you actually are can't die. It hasn't been born. The body's born, but you're not your body. Simple. This isn't just Buddhism. This is a Advaita, Hinduism, even Christianity touches on this in different ways. Through using the theistic approach. Somebody's higher, better, knows more. God and his offspring knows more than you do. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Maybe you won't be here if that's your path. You'd be somewhere where they're talking about that situation. So not wrong. It's just a different way. This tends to be quite a bit more direct, with a lot less in between. Although there needs to be some kind of a teacher, a teaching, and a community. So Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Without all three of them are here right now. Whether you want to be here or not, you're here. So while you're here, you're part of the Sangha, or the community of people on a spiritual path, particularly that of the Buddha's teaching. Nothing to be right or wrong about. Further questions, especially from someone who hasn't asked a question. Isan.
In relationships, some seem easier, some seem harder, some seem closer, some seem more distant. Is there an element of that that's important for us to understand?
You're already doing it. That's all just what you said is it's very simple. Nothing extra. You start to step out of one of those that goes into another element, then it's starting to get more cloudy and more confusing, more circular. So keep it very simple.
Just notice that it
Just notice it.
that way.
Yeah, feels that way. Anything you conclude won't last. Feeling really close to somebody and suddenly you don't feel so close to them anymore. Feeling it's called marriage. Very interesting area, a relationship. So it's just don't anything that happens, don't particularly add to it, make it worse. If it's bad weather, don't start blaming the weatherman or weather woman. No, they're not at fault. They're just a messenger.
You were talking about even Christianity has a sense of body, spirit split or something like that. So I don't understand how to understand the when you say you are not your body, then my mind wants to make a kind of disembodied thing that is me, that is not my body, but that sounds too much like the old Gnostic split. That sounds too much like Christianity in various forms, and I don't think that's what you mean. Could you say more?
What do you think I mean?
When you say you're not your body, maybe I think you mean that you are, but you're not, because you are
Exactly. That's so precise.
Everything fits together to make this thing.
Everything is, go ahead.
Have I just answered that?
Kind of, but you could say it's just it's not some big conclusion that where it's a aha situation. Those are not so trustworthy because they're happening in a apparent time and space and they won't last. You don't need that. All you need to do is see what this is. There's no conclusion. You don't need to conclude something you don't need to look at the color blue and conclude that it's blue. There's nothing to believe in, nothing to disbelieve in. Eugene?
What does it mean to include?
Well, it's situational. So it'll be because it's something you're going to do. So it has a situational quality to it. If you notice you're excluding something, then you could kind of work the other way, like a noisy neighbor or something, or somebody that's giving you a hard time with something. You could try to just include that a little bit more before you start getting offended by it and shouting at them. You try to include a little bit more of the negativity that's there or the difficulty that's there. Be a little bit more with that and experience the reaction. This happens and then that occurs. So this happens and then there's some kind of like that, and just be with that. So when I say include, not only the situation, because sometimes that inclusion shows up as somebody, well, I'm just trying to be nice, so I'm doing everything I can, which is horseshit. Pardon me, you too. But it's a very subtle way that the ego mind comes in and takes credit for being a really good person. And there isn't anyone. So just include. And sometimes that including might be including the way you keep excluding things. Including, then we're starting to get close to the way your primary ignorance is functioning, called ignoring that there is no one here at the center, even though you might be having a great time, enjoying yourself, and you have a lot of friends, and you get to roll out of bed every morning and have a wonderful day, and good coworkers and a great family, which I know you do. So, do you follow a little bit what I'm saying? It keeps changing around. You can't track it down. You can never get to be perfect. And why? Already perfect. Already perfect. That's difficult. There's nothing to fix. There's nothing to conclude. This is called the spiritual path. It's not a mundane path of success and failure. That might be full of it. There's different ways of handling that, depending on the tradition. So that inclusion is not about, when I say don't include, I know you can't help doing that. I can't, again, I'm so dyslexic, I can't remember whether I said include or disclude or I know there's two clues. There's include and conclude, exclude, there's three of them. Is there more? Any other clues?
Preclude.
Huh? Preclude, and then I don't have a clue. Sorry. Bad puns. Yes,
Back to your question.
yes.
Say I acknowledge that I'm not close with a coworker. Do I not try to inquire about their life or become curious about them? I just accept that we're not close?
A little bit. I would do, and I'm just kind of imagining a situation that you've just given me a few words. So I've had coworkers. So I know what that's like. So I know stuff. So I know what that's like. I know what it's like to be with somebody that's a little uncomfortable or you don't feel close to. And I would say just do a little bit, but not by way of looking for results. If you're looking for any results, then then your functioning is probably a little off. If are you a meditator? You meditate? No. So eyes open, open them. If all the things you're doing with you could lay on the floor sprawled out. I prefer that you sit up with a straight spine, but the most important thing is because this is the way we sleep. So open your eyes so that your meditation is tying you into your life. Open your eyes. And then as far as this individual, man or woman?
A man.
Yeah, so a little bit. And I would, I'd have to see more about it. I would say do a little bit of that, but make sure when you do it, you're just doing it as a kind of a gesture to make sure that you're not breaking off because of their thought patterns and coming to conclusions about, well, I don't like them or they don't like me or all of that. So you do a little bit. The person, but don't conclude if you can help it. I mean, it could be anything from the person just doesn't like you, which is a valid thing, or to they're terrified of you. And especially if it's a guy, they don't want to look weak. And so they're not about, the guy might be in love with you. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, there could be some kind of dynamics happening where because of your presumption and preconceptions about it, but the way you could work with it just a little bit, just could be something simple as, time of day, the weather, or anything like that. So, but watch out. When I say watch out, I'm just saying be clear about your tendency to react to that situation and go somewhere else rather than just have a willingness to just let it be what it is. If you can do that, then you could actually reach out a little bit without adding on the expectation that, well, if he says this or if he looks away or if he continues to ignore you, that must mean the people, human beings are doing this all the time. This happens, that happens. And so that must mean they actually abandon the very situation because the ego mind does not like awareness. The ego mind wants to know, am I right? Am I wrong? How many times have people say to you, well, is that good or bad? I mean, it's like, well, thanks. That you could just, it's just extra, fills in the space so we don't have to live in an open dimension of being where we're so clear about what's happening. We're no longer threatened by anything. Nothing's, even our own death is not terrifying anymore. If it comes up, we're ready for that. We can do that. All compounded things will vanish. We're one of them. So when it comes time to vanish. I mean, you could say goodbye. And in that situation, I would know. I'd be happy to talk to you if you ever wanted to talk about it. I could do that more about the specifics, and I don't want to ask you too much because it's personal. But I would say move in that direction just a little bit. You'll know, just a little bit. Could be a comment or if the coworker is right standing next to you all the time.
Particularly.
Yeah. So it would be good to say a little bit, just for the point of the three that I have talked about is communication, cooperation, collaboration. You can't do the last two unless you do the first one. You have to communicate, which means what? I have something called a 90-10 rule, which might not work in this situation. It means listen 90% of the time, talk 10. And so all you'd have to do is say, how's it going? And if they just go, probably they're terrified of you. It could happen. Do you sense something about it from what I've said or not?
Well, he speaks 0% of the time, so I can only do 0% listening, so.
Yeah, but you could ask
I
him.
try to talk, but he doesn't.
Oh, you have tried
Very
that.
shy, so.
Well, see, that's a pretty important insight. He might be afraid of you. I mean, he might not even know he's afraid of you. I mean, he might be just kind of fluffing up something inside. You know, it's probably because you're so homely. Thank you for receiving that. That was meant to be funny. You see what I'm saying? I mean, so there's so many different things that could be showing up there, but I just go really slow and don't look to any expectation about it beyond just extend yourself a little bit, be friendly with them. You're welcome. What is your name?
Madison.
Madison. Thank you. Gary, we'll get to you next.
If you see no separation, how does relationships change? You know, what you're saying, sometimes they're closer, further away.
Mm-hmm.
Does that dynamic still exist in the same way?
Oh my goodness, it can get more intense. You get more what we've been calling a relationship. Actually, that's a way of keeping it at bay by having ideas. But when you stop doing that, then the relationship can get overwhelming. Something that the ego is trying to protect itself from. Very similar to what Madison is happening here. It's a different thing because it's somebody that you don't particularly know very well because it doesn't say anything. But that's pretty powerful. I mean, I could say to Madison, I say, why don't you just sit there and do your job? Don't worry about it. But something about it is, you know, a little puzzling for you that you're spending the whole day. What kind of work or job is it?
I work in a wine cellar.
Yeah. Well, you're probably hitting the bottle too much. Get out of the cellar and come up in the living room. So yeah, I understand. So you're just doing your job, whatever the function is there. Could be fear. Or it might be something else. Could be a person that has other issues that are going on in their family that they're concerned about and just doesn't want to say too much. Doesn't want to be bothered or something. Sometimes people who are introverted sometimes just look like they're mean, like really they're just afraid of being out. They don't want to be. I'm introverted. I probably don't seem that way. But when I was your age, I was terrified of opening my mouth. I did a lot, and I would always be embarrassed because I said dumb things.
Just a question from down at the monastery. Chogyam has a question.
Chogyam.
He asked, if things seem bad, does knowledge of circularity indicate that things will get better?
Yes and no. Anything else from him?
Not yet.
Come on, Chogyam. He'll get back with us. Yes, sir.
Regarding how to work on trauma or, you know, either externally inflicted or internally as it relates to relationship.
Yeah.
How to strategies for working on.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many variables there. I would say, I mean, it could be anything from, you know, get a therapist to, not recommending that, but I'm not going to say, you know, everybody needs to meditate immediately. Maybe you might need some other kind of help from someone who's coming out of one of the sciences or something like that, possibly. From the point of view of, are you speaking about someone else or yourself? Or if I can ask, I would respond different ways.
Of others and myself.
Okay, well,
situations where like I was harmed externally by others, but
yeah,
I brought it about for myself anyway.
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, look what you're asking. I'm a monk, so the path I and teach is that awareness. Not joining, nothing to join. You don't have any. There's no way you can join this situation. No dues. There's nothing like that. But it's available and it's here. And so I would say train your mind. And how do you do that? Sit down, hold still, watch what moves. And insofar as you can, do no math. Don't add, subtract, divide. Don't do anything with it other than just the bare attention of whatever's moving. What's happening in each person is relative to what's been happening to you since you were born and even before then. So how that works. So when you use the word trauma, as you would know, there's so many ways that word would be the only thing you could use. How you were treated, or what happened to you, or what's still happening to you. So I say less is better. So what do we have a say so about? We can't control our thoughts. We don't know what they are. We just know we all have them. We don't know what a thought is. I would say if we did, I'd say, show me your thoughts. So you might be able to talk or express yourself, but that's not actually it. But what you can do, take everything that's in motion that seems to be attributable to me and hold it still. And then that which continues to move seems to be, at least eventually, maybe not at first, starts to express itself as the actual difficulty we're having. Whether the causes and conditions could be like a trauma or anything that's happened like that. It starts to show up, the structure of that starts to show up more and more clearly, especially if we don't conclude too soon, or if we don't conclude at all until we're kind of forced into it. Fire is hot, that's a conclusion, kind of. Water's wet, but it's very, very direct. You don't have to get someone's opinion. I think this is hot. What do you think? Stick your hand in there. Now that might happen with a 3-year-old because they're still, they don't know about concluding yet. So I would say, are you a meditator? Yeah. So eyes open.
Usually like flipping.
Okay, well, that's okay as long as there's some kind of, and I say that just from, you could say, well, what are you doing with that conclusion? I would say, okay, if that's how you're receiving it, then close them. I'm not here to get you to do something else. If your experience of that is different, but I would say you could start out with sit down, hold still, very still without being rigid. Move whenever your knee hurts. Don't try to sit through anything. It's not a macho thing. Sit down, hold still, symmetrical, back straight, on a chair, on a cushion, on the floor, standing up, and just receive whatever continues to move. And whatever continues to move eventually, not this week, not next week, maybe tomorrow, or maybe today, the form of that trauma will start to show without a story. If it shows up with a story, then just keep looking at the stories without pushing them down, without fluffing them up or adding to them or explaining, and without distracting yourself or looking away or trying to get rid of it or something like that. Just observe what moves. And because nothing lasts, everything is changing, that eventually will morph into more and more closely what the fundamental understanding that is probably being covered up by the original. So, it's sometimes called fixation. Sometimes some traditions say you got pain here, that's locked down in the body, because body and mind are not two different things. They just look different. You have no access to the mind other than what we think we do. Sometimes we say, well, I don't want you to think, as if we could control somebody else's thoughts. We can't even control our own. So I would say, do it through awareness. Just keep going into that area you refer to as trauma without any credentials, without any roadmaps. If you got roadmaps, you might need a little bit. I just gave you one. Sit down, hold still, watch what moves. It's a roadmap. And it's not about Buddhism, but it's not about Buddhism. It's not about a spiritual path, but it's not about a spiritual path. It could start out very rudimentary, with some kind of very pragmatic kind of approach to it, but eventually that starts to bust loose, and it can be terrifying to ego. If ego's not ready for that, what ego is ever ready, sometimes that can be frightening. That's why the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is so supportive and helpful. At least you have companions on the path. They're called spiritual friends. They don't meddle with you, try to fix you. They respect your confusion. At the same time, they respect your Buddha nature. Unusual community. What is your name, sir?
K.
Again?
K.
Like the initial K?
Yeah.
No period?
No.
Okay. Okay, K. KK. How many do you have?
No, that's it.
Are we going somewhere else now? Food? Okay. Any final questions before we stop? Yes? No? Okay. Good. Let's do, how do we do this? What do we do next?
Just bow and go.
Bow and go eat. Good. You can do that. I'm sorry you can't join us.
That's good.